I think I do understand the challenge of what mastering yourself looks like. Of all the things we want to work on in the world, the most important thing is ourselves, and the hardest thing.
Everybody, welcome back to the RMG Agent Podcast. I'm your host, Reed Moore, with my co-host, Jake Bartlett. But before I give it over to him, I want you to go over to the website, rmgagentpodcast.com. All kinds of goodies and treats. It's basically like Christmas for real estate professionals, so go ahead and head there. But speaking of Christmas, Jake, for real estate professionals, we have another episode of our Master Series, and we have Chase Williams, who's a dear personal friend of ours, and absolutely a master in our industry. Tell us a little bit about Chase.
Yeah, so I'm really excited for this episode. Chase is one of my best friends in the industry. He's one of my best friends out of the industry. He's the godfather to my kids. In fact, in my phone, he's under the Godfather. So I'm really excited. He's been a mentor for 5-6 years of mine. And one of the things that Chase does, a few of the things that he does really well is he's got a tremendous grit, and he's really great at succeeding through others by empowering them to be the best version of themselves. And so I am really excited to listen to this episode.
It's going to be great. I mean, Chase has succeeded at building a 500 plus unit team like 14 years ago when that was the rarest of air. He's succeeding at building a huge market center. He's launched brokerages. He coaches and mentors agents and brokers alike. He's absolutely great. So, so guys, enjoy our time with the master, the Godfather.
The Godfather, yep.
Chase Williams. You know, I have this opportunity to put people in the chair here that I listen to, that I want to hear from, and that I think are valid across not just the mastery of their career path, but just who they are as people, right? Yeah. And so, putting your false humility aside, why would an agent, why would they listen to you on this podcast?
Well, it's funny that you say that, false humility, right, Reed? Because I often say when I teach, one of the things that, makes me valid in order to be in front of the room is I've screwed up more than most people. So that's a fact, right? Like anyone who's...
Not false, humble, fact.
That's right. Anyone who has succeeded at any level will tell you that there are failures along the way. You get some things right along the way too. So I think you hope that people can learn from both of those things, both sides of those things.
Yeah.
I've been in real estate since 2011. Right, so longer than most, but less than a lot. And when I got in, we were kind of coming out of the very bottom of what happened with the last recession, right? The Great Recession. We all kind of know what happened back in 7 and 8, and it took a few years before anything was really going on. When I got into the industry, I got in with a good friend of mine. His name's Corey, and we started building a big sales team in Northern California, as you mentioned. We did that for several years together. Kind of co-owned that business, and in 2014, I think we sold just under 400 homes, 393 or 395, I can't remember.
And in 2014,
those were big numbers back then.
Those were huge numbers back then.
Now it's like, oh, not bad, right?
Still big numbers, but back then it was two or three times what somebody would think today.
Yeah, it was funny because we would travel around the country and meet with other teams, right? We were big on masterminding, collaborating, and learning from others, and we would share with them how many units we sold, right? Close to 400, really close to 400. And then we would share with them our volume. I think that same year we did under 100 million, 90, 93 or 95 million. And I mixed those numbers up. And people would say, you guys should move because our average price point was so much lower. But we did that successfully for a few years. And actually, we were expanding that business into multiple markets. Mm-hmm. So we were in a few different cities in Northern California and had a couple different offices and small little kind of mini teams there in those locations. So we were expanding before expansion was like a hot topic in the industry, right? Everyone was just kind of trying to figure that out, and we were trying to figure it out too. There's a lot of banging your head against the wall back in those days. Not a lot of models and systems around it, so it was a lot of trial and error. I ended up selling my half of that business back to Corey, and I moved back home, which was Spokane, Coeur d'Alene area for me. I thought I would go and build another team because we had done that really successfully in a really short period of time. It was a lot of fun. But I met a gentleman named Bruce Hardy at the time, and Bruce was the regional director for the Northwest region at Keller Williams, and he also owned a large real estate brokerage in Spokane, a Keller Williams office. And as I was kind of figuring out where I would land and rebuild another team, Bruce kind of proposed to me the idea of running his company for him, right? Matt Keller Williams, we call that a team leader. It's really like the CEO of the office.
Yeah.
And I had no interest in that, right? I was like, wait a second, I just sold my half of my company. I'm going to go build another company. I don't want a job, right? Like I wasn't looking for that. I had no interest in that. In more conversation, though, I realized that it was really in line with who I was and more importantly, who I wanted to become in the industry on the leadership side of the business, and having the opportunity to really guide and lead and coach and mentor, all those words kind of maybe pulled into one, real estate agents.
Yeah.
Because in having built the team, I realized that my passion, what kind of lit me on fire, was helping other people be successful. And by other people, to me, it meant real estate agents.
Right.
Like not necessarily the consumer, right? I like people in general, so certainly I like the consumer, but selling wasn't what excited me.
Yeah.
It wasn't my passion. So I took that role and ended up, being in that role for a number of years, and ultimately getting to see a different side of the industry, which was serving real estate agents and all types of real estate agents. But my focus, of course, was on the top real estate agents, the best of the best in that marketplace and beyond. So I got to do that. I've had the chance to coach professionally top agents across the country. Ultimately, I've launched an office and built that from the ground up as the owner and operator. We call that an OP in our world, but ultimately the owner and operator of that business. And now I do some of those same things, and I'm also in regional leadership. So I'm the area director for the Northwest region.
Yeah.
And that encompasses about 6,500 total agents, 36 offices, and 4 Western states: Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska.
Awesome. So yeah, so a pretty broad. There's a lot of breadth to your experience.
Yeah.
What are one or two defining moments in your real estate career where things could have gotten really bad, or like you had a hard crossroad, something like that?
Yeah, I think there's been a few. I think of a couple. One was pretty early on, a couple years in, right? I was fresh out of working in corporate America. So before I got into real estate, I worked for a really big company in leadership, and now I was working for myself, which I always wanted to do, right? That was great. It was exciting, and I had this passion for it. And then one day I remember that we weren't going to make payroll. Right? We had
New experience.
Yeah, I was like, you work for a Fortune 100 company, you don't really ever worry about making payroll.
Right.
Nor is it your job to worry about that. But it was mine. And I remember calling Corey, he was kind of in the early phases of building before we got to some of the numbers that I shared. And, it was like, I think it was a Friday afternoon, and I was on my cell phone walking around outside, just like getting some fresh air, just pacing it off, because it was stressful, right? Like first time I'd ever experienced that. And we both had to write a check into the company that day to make sure that people that we were responsible for could get paid that day.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments where it was like, okay, was it scary? Yes. But I think what was defining about it maybe was, it was like, okay, this takes a full commitment, right? Like you can go a lot of different ways here, right? Like you can get scared and shut it down. You can get locked up and paralyzed and unsure what to do, or you can write the check and get back to work and kind of recommit to the vision that you have for where you're going.
Yeah.
You'd hope you never run into those situations, right? Like if everything's up and to the right and all your plans come together, you never will, but that's not always the case.
I read that book to my kids when they were 3.
Yeah, right?
It was called A Fairy Tale.
Up and to the right.
Up and to the right.
Only up and to the right, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So talk to me about, you piqued my interest around this, like you have this situation, it's right there, and you have to stroke a check, and there's just this moment of maybe actually making a decision when it comes to the business, or actually deciding I'm committing in a new and very real way. How does that translate to what you see with agents? We were just lucky enough to see Tony Robbins yesterday, right? And Tony said something that I wrote down that I think really struck me. He said, your biology is not your destiny. Mm-hmm. Decision is your destiny. And so you get into these hard places, right? Whether it's, something big hard or something little hard, everyone's got their own hard, right? Like sometimes we think, oh, well, that's harder than what I have to deal with, or that's not as hard as what I have to deal with.
And that's not necessarily true, right? Like when it's hard, it's hard. And so in those moments, you have decisions to make, and you either double down, right, and continue forward because you believe in the direction that you're heading, the plan that you have, you're betting on yourself, however you think about that, or you get stuck in insecurity, questioning, doubt, fear, all these big words, right? But we all experience them from time to time, and I see that happen a lot of times with agents. Sometimes there's some common places that happens. It either happens in a really challenging period in the industry. Right. We're seeing some of that in recent months here. There's headwinds, if you will, that are real. And so sometimes it causes people to get locked up or fearful or have a few bad months in a row and wondering if they're doing the right thing. It happens sometimes when agents are really pushing to build something, right? If they're building past being an individual agent into a team or something like that. There's some specific points along the way that are dark.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Either nothing feels like it's working, or a key person quits, or right. Yeah. Something happens between like the day you decide to build and the day that maybe you get close to where you thought you would be at some point.
Right.
And so those are examples of moments where you're like, okay, can I remind myself why I'm doing this in the first place?
Sure.
Right? Like what was important to me about it when I started?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. To bring that perspective back in the darkness, right? Because sometimes you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel in the moment.
Yeah.
You almost have to go back to like, why am I doing this, right? Why is this important? Do I still believe in the plan that I have, right? Or do I need to make a decision to continue forward but pivot the plan?
Yeah.
That happens on occasion,
It
right?
does, yeah.
You don't have to necessarily go down with the sinking ship if something's not right, but you can continue forward on the journey. So I see agents get into those places, and I guess what I would say is there's a couple things that I see them do that I think are smart, right? One is they have other people along the ride with them, right? They have a coach or a mentor or both, right? They have a group of people that are heading to the same place that they're heading to. Some are a little farther along, right? So some have gone through that dark thing that they're experiencing, and they can kind of say, hey, I have some thoughts for you that might be helpful because I went through that.
Yeah.
Some are in the middle of the same exact thing. And it's not because misery loves company that there's value there. It's because the other people that decide they want to stay on the journey, you can collaborate and figure it out and tweak together, pivot if you need to together. So those are some smart things that people do. And of course, they remember why they started in the first place. Yeah. What's going to be on the other side, rather than, for lack of a better word, retreating.
Right. There have just been these common themes in talking with people who have like taken their shots and they're still standing, right, for a long period of time. And one of those common themes is relationship with other people, right? Yeah. And maybe the opposite theme has been ego, and how so many of us had to learn some of the worst lessons of our careers, and it was because of ego. Yeah. Right. But you see people and they're still standing, not because they were individually so strong, they certainly were. Sure. But because they were surrounded by other people as well. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. People that care enough about you to point out when your ego's getting in the way would be another good example. Right. Or to call you forward into being something better or different in a moment when maybe you're not showing up that way, or just to point out a silly decision, a silly business decision. Like, hey, can I share with you why that might be a challenging decision to make? Or, hey, I tried it that way and I'm happy to share with you how it went for me. It wasn't great. You can still do whatever you want, but right? Like people who care enough about you to offer that type of advice is almost more valuable than those that are just, there cheering you on. You want that too. That's helpful at times, but it's maybe not as helpful as somebody who has a different perspective, different level of experience, and wants to see you win, but is willing to point out something that might not be serving you on where you want to go, right?
So let's talk about behaviors. What type of behaviors do you have that you think have really excelled your growth, and what behaviors maybe have hindered you in your real estate career and your leadership career?
Great question. I don't give up very easily, right? Like some maybe would call that grit. Some would call it stubbornness. Maybe it's both. So that's always been helpful, right? Like I tend to think of the possibilities. I think that, no as an answer is typically unacceptable, at least in my brain. There's always a way.
Yeah.
There's always a solution. If it's that important, you'll figure it out, right? So that grittiness has certainly been helpful. I would say something that I've had to really be careful with in terms of a behavior is I have a lot of intensity, right? Like I show up in an intense way, right? Like, if I'm painting a pretty picture of intensity, I call it passion.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? And I have a lot of that, so that's helpful, right? But there's moments and there's times and there's conversations when, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, right? Intensity can be one of those.
Sure.
And kind of the example I always use is if I'm having a challenging conversation that needs to happen in business with, someone who has a very different behavioral style than me, maybe like an administrative person that has a C or an S type behavioral style, or a lot lower level of intensity in how they show up. Me showing up with a lot of that is not going to be helpful.
Right.
It's likely to be hurtful.
Sure.
Right? Even if that's just my natural style, that's not a good excuse. That's not a good enough excuse for me to show up because that's my natural style. If I'm teaching a class or giving a talk or encouraging, a sales team, for example, then that intensity is going to be really helpful potentially, right? So it's identifying those moments where something that's natural to you is either going to hurt or hinder you in the pursuit of your goals.
Yeah.
Right? And then screwing that up enough to gain some wisdom around, this is one of those times when I can bring it up. This is one of those times when I need to bring it down.
Sure.
So I've certainly had my opportunities to learn that.
I'm just thinking like the ability to walk into a room so intensely that you just gotta blow everybody up before you open your mouth.
Right?
I've totally done that before. You
just the energy.
You see something on somebody's face and you're just like, I'm not a yeller. Like I'm not gonna yell.
No.
I'm like, I opened my door real fast.
Yeah. I was excited.
Came out hot. I'm like, let's go. I was like, whoa, easy.
That's exactly right.
Oh my gosh. So I'm a real estate agent. I'm listening to this, and for whatever internal reason, I've told myself the story like this guy's in brokerage leadership and regional leadership. He doesn't understand me. He doesn't understand what I actually do and what I actually go through. Personally, I think that's all BS, and it's a way for us to protect our ego.
Sure.
That's my opinion of it. But what would you say to that agent who is, you don't understand me?
Well, I guess, first of all, it depends, right? Maybe I don't, right? Like I'm a big fan of getting to know people and where they're at and understanding what their specific challenges are, number one. Number two, if you do enough of that, you realize there's a lot of common challenges.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Whether you're a single agent, a rainmaker, running a brokerage, lead buyer's agent, lead listing agent, or just a person in general trying to succeed in life. A lot of the challenges we face are common. Not all of them, certainly not, but a lot of them are, right? And so I would say that in order to do anything well in life, in order to master something, whatever something is, business, selling real estate, anything, right? You really have to master yourself first.
Yeah.
And so I think I do understand the challenge of what mastering yourself looks like, right? Like of all the things we want to work on in the world, the most important thing is ourselves, and the hardest thing I would offer.
Another one of those patterns. Everybody has said these things, right? So we did 23 episodes on a lot of tactical, here's how you do real estate.
Yeah.
And then we're talking to people who've been in the industry, 10 to 20 years, and they all say the same thing, and that is like you're your worst enemy, or you have to master yourself, or if you want to build something, you gotta learn how to sell and do the hard things, and then you gotta figure your crap out.
Yeah.
So what was that like for you? Like, what were you just an easy person? Like you looked at the man in the mirror and you're just like, we're gonna have a good time. Like this is gonna be easy.
No, I don't think any of it was easy. I think, if I was lucky in any way, right, and I've certainly been lucky in as many ways as the next guy, it was because I had an ability to kind of focus, right? And let me expand on that a little bit, right? Because it might have just come, but that might have been the lucky part. In other words, I am not really swayed as much as maybe some other people around like chaos around me. I'm not in tune to the details as much as, maybe others are, right? Which is why I need people like that in my world. But being able to like kind of block out a lot of the other stuff has allowed me to focus on the things that can actually move the needle. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, there's another side to that, right? Which is if you don't have the right people that are focusing on those things that you're not, then you can create a lot of messes, right?
Yeah.
And which is never the intention. I find, though, that business is messy all the time, just to varying degrees.
Sure.
So I would rather have a messy growing business than a messy declining business.
Okay, I think that brings up a myth that I have heard and probably said to myself over and over again, and that is when you're building something, it gets messier and messier. Sometimes the velocity makes it feel like it's more and more out of control, and there's this temptation to clean it all up, tie a bow on it, and now it's going to be perfect, and now maybe we can grow again.
Yeah.
I have seen really poor results in my life doing it that way, and I think I've seen that in others as well.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that's right. I think, again, you get what you focus on, right? You get more of what you focus on. So if you focus on all the messes and cleaning them up every day, you'll just end up with more to clean up. Because that's business, right? Like it's especially in business with people and capital and, industry change and whatever else you want to throw in there. There's never a really long period of everything going perfectly. Is that the other fairy tale book that you read your kids?
Yeah, that's right.
When they were 3, right?
The moment in time that everything was perfect.
The business where everything goes perfectly for a really long time.
Happily ever after.
I've never been involved in one of those.
Yeah.
At any level, right?
Yeah.
So I think you choose your focus. That's another thing that Tony was sharing yesterday.
Right.
As a matter of fact, focus equals energy, right? So it's like, am I going to give my energy to the messiness that is business, like with some false sense of cleaning it all up at some point, or am I going to give my focus to growing or these key areas of my business that help me succeed at the level I truly desire?
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe because of some of my natural behavioral style or being taught and coached by really great people, like, hey, not everything matters equally. Call it the 80-20 principle. Call it whatever you want. It's focus.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's been helpful for me. It turns out that I'm, not great at a lot of things. I'm really good at a few things.
Sure.
So that helps with focus too, because we like to do the things we're good at. So there's only 2 or 3 of those. And if I can focus there, we can move the needle, and we can move the needle in a big way. So that's been helpful. And I see that, I share that maybe in part because I see that as a real challenge. With those that are looking to go to the next level or break through, or they've kind of reached this point of hitting their ceiling of achievement. A lot of times it's for lack of focus, right? It's like something got to a point where it felt really big and heavy and scary, and you try to steady it because it's scary versus continuing to focus on the things that help get it there in the first place.
Yeah, there's like that bicycle principle, right? Like you're trying to steady the bike, but if you just went, it would steady itself better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It makes me think, I started thinking about marriage and these other things. And, if you apply the same idea of stop moving forward and clean everything up, but then that causes you to focus on the things that need to be cleaned up, that's an endless hole. Right? What if you looked at your marriage and like, I'm going to nitpick everything that's not perfect, and when it's perfect, we will talk about the future. We will dream together. We will build a life together. You would be the most miserable person. That
sounds miserable.
It's horrible. Just horrible, right?
Yeah.
Is your business experiencing that from you?
Yeah.
Right? Unintentionally, right?
I see that a lot, right? And And so it's just, something to be aware of. It's nothing that can't be corrected, right? If you desire enough to break through.
Yeah.
Stop trying to do everything. Stop trying to make everything perfect. It's not an excuse for not running a great business, by the way. It doesn't mean like make messes on purpose and, not care about things that truly matter, right? That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But get the right people in place, right? Like understand that not everything matters equally. It doesn't mean that everything doesn't matter to some degree.
Right.
And then figure out who it should matter to.
Yes.
Because not everything should matter to you equally. Not everything should matter to me equally. But if I'm not the only person in my business, then something that matters not at all to me is going to be someone else's number one priority.
Yeah.
If you do that well, then the customer's going to be served, the agent's going to be served, and you can continue to grow and build.
What are one or two times where just whatever you set your hands to just flat out went up in flames? It all just, it didn't work.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of those. There's, when I first tried to replace myself in a really high-level leadership position, right? Team leader, CEO role. Mm-hmm. I did a really, really poor job of finding my replacement, of hiring my replacement, right? And, it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many times I tried, I just couldn't quite get that right? That succession piece is a tricky one. And I think for a lot of reasons, but that's something that, there was times when I was just like, am I ever going to get this right? Right? Maybe I'm not the person yet that's earned the right to move on to the next thing or into the next role. And so going back and just understanding the mistakes I made along the way and the DNA that I had on some of those mistakes, and frankly, letting go of some of the things maybe that I really didn't have control over, deciding which were those and which ones I had a lot of DNA on was a tricky process. That was one of them. I would say anytime that I've tried to focus on something that really wasn't the core of the business that I was in, right? Like maybe a pet project or a shiny object or something that was talked a lot about in the industry, but I thought I would do on the side.
Sure.
Might benefit the core business, and so I would give it, a tiny bit of attention and a tiny bit of capital and a tiny bit of effort.
Right.
Those things almost always go up in flames. And not because they're not valid, because they're not getting the proper amount of focus from the right person.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, okay, I'm going to do this side project or I'm going to add this thing. Well, all that happened was I split my focus.
Got it.
Rather than I'm going to stay focused on what I do well, and one of those would be finding the person that can then go and focus on that thing well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally does.
So it's like, I think there's an old Russian proverb, right? It says you chase two rabbits, you catch neither.
Yep.
So not only does that thing go up in flames, but actually the collateral damage oftentimes with splitting your focus is your core business can suffer.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not getting all of what it was getting.
Yeah. Okay, so the last 18 months ish, you've been watching agents have a rough go at it. Maybe not all of them, but maybe some of them that aren't having a rough go of it have actually just put their, rolled up their sleeves and gotten after it.
Partly, yeah.
Well, what are some patterns that you've seen, and what are some things that you've seen with people, whether it's mindset or skill set or effort or just whatever it is, that you think like, I think this is the reason this person's outperforming?
Yeah, well, you said one of them. It's just, effort, rolling up your sleeves and doing the work, right? And that's easy to say. If you've not had to in a while, it can be hard to do, right?
Yeah.
So think about you've been really diligent and consistent and built good habit around going to the gym every day.
Yeah.
Right? For a really long time. And that's given you great results health-wise or strength-wise or whatever. And then, something happens, you take an extended, time off, vacation, or maybe you get like a slight injury and so you're out of the gym for a while. Mm-hmm. Well, you know how quickly that habit took forever to build it, but it can go away like that.
Yep.
When it's time, when you finally make the decision to go back, it feels really hard. It feels almost like you're starting back over.
Yeah.
But that's what's required. If you want to recommit to your health, recommit to your strength, whatever it is in that example, you've got to almost rebuild the habit almost entirely. Now, there's a period of time after you get through the first part of going back where you're like, okay, I remember what this is like, and I can get back in the groove a little faster.
Yeah.
So even though for the first few days or even first few weeks, it feels like you're starting 10 years ago, it'll come back faster.
Right.
So it's that initial part, like, oh my gosh, I've got to go back to prospecting every day as an example in our industry when I haven't done that for years.
Yeah.
You might have to go back to doing that
Yep.
for a while, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good example of just pure hard work. I think the other thing is that I see people doing in a pattern that works really well is they're going back to the classroom.
Yeah.
Right? And a classroom's different for everyone, but they're getting back on the plane and going back to the conference. They're going back to the mastermind groups they were part of. They're getting back to that collaboration and or back to some of the fundamental skills that they spent years honing, and that's paying dividends for them because they're realizing, I think, more than even they thought that some things have changed. Some things haven't.
Right.
But like, you know, the consumer constantly changing, the industry's constantly changing. So if we get away from being a learning based, if we get away from being a good student and studying and practicing, which we've been able to get away with up until a couple years ago.
Right.
Right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
We were just bumping into deals right and left, and so we created bad habits, and it worked
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah. And you can tell yourself a story as to why it worked, and it's BS.
Totally. Yeah. And that's that ego that you mentioned, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
It slips back in
Like,
there.
I'm amazing.
And you're like,
Up and to
oh,
the right.
shoot.
Remember this book?
Like, what happened, right? Well, something changed.
Right.
And so, you know, I see the ones that are, you know, succeeding regardless of the market. They're actually falling back to their highest level of fundamental. Right?
Yeah.
They're falling back to, I understand that consistent learning and training is important to me. They're falling back to, I understand these key habits, lead generation, et cetera, are important to my success. And I have to rebuild the habit, even if it's hard.
Yes.
Because I know that those things will take me where I want to go.
There's some really, really hard things around going back and doing things that are actually, they're just hard because of the habits. It's hard to go to the gym if you haven't been going, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there's two other experiences that agents have, and that is they experience shame and they experience entitlement. Right?
Big words.
Yeah. So I've been doing this for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. I am entitled to not have to do blank. Well, if your bank account disagrees with your entitlement, there's one of those that will always win.
Yep, that's right.
Right, that's the deal. But there's the shame, right? Like, you know, I go to the gym and I have, 10% 10% body fat and I'm ripped and I can just lift and I let myself go and I'm 100 pounds overweight. I remember what it was like to be in shape, and when I go back to the gym and I'm exhausted in 5 minutes and it's not just the hard thing, it's the fact that there's so much shame with
How did I get here?
how did I get here?
Yeah.
Right. So how does an agent navigate those things?
Well, I think back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like it's an important time for a good decision, right? A smart decision. Remember why you're doing it in the first place. Remember what's on the other side and why it's important to you, whether that's who you serve or the outcome that you're seeking, whatever it may be, right? So start there. The other thing is get around people who are feeling the same way, but are want to get back in the gym, right? And do it together.
Yeah.
Don't do it by yourself. Well, that's not any fun anyways, right? So find your tribe in that sense. And then go and find those coaches and mentors, those leaders that are going to care enough about you and helping you get out of that spot. Not to judge you, right? All they're worried about is helping support you and getting back to where you want to go, right? So they're going to encourage you. They're also going to challenge you, right? There's a difference. There's a difference between the cheerleader on the sideline that just cheers no matter what, whether you did a good job or a bad job, and the coach that is also cheering for you and your fan, but points out when what you're doing is not lining up with what you said you wanted.
Yeah.
Right? And can kind of help you get there. That is so valuable. So, don't do it on your own. Find those key people in your world that can help you get there. And just spend some time remembering, why it's important to you.
Yeah.
Because and don't get stuck in some fantasy that it's going to be easy to go back. Just embrace the hard.
Yeah.
Just like you did before, right? You didn't get to 10% body fat and ripped because it was easy.
Ever. Yeah.
So if you just can kind of acknowledge that, that's a good step in the right direction to knowing what it's going to take to get back there.
Yeah, it makes me think also just this, one of the things that I've learned that has been helpful for me is just the question, what is the opposite? Right? It's going to be hard to go back to the gym. Well, what's the opposite? I continue down this path. Right. Yeah. So I need to go back. I need to prospect. I need to plan my weeks, plan my days, use my calendar,
Totally.
budget, all of these things. And I'm embarrassed about it. I'm angry about it. But what's the opposite?
It was only a few weeks ago I was sharing this with you regarding my calendar, right? I was kind of upset. I was kind of aggravated at myself because I'd spent all these years learning how to control my time really well.
Yeah.
And then for a little while there, I was letting anything get on my calendar. I was saying yes to everyone, right?
Sure.
There's like a heart behind wanting to help people and being a recovering people pleaser, right? I'm like back in this habit of like, sure, let's put it on there and squeezing everything in. So I ran into these couple weeks where I was like, what the heck is this? Overbooked, zero margin. And that was not okay with me, right? You mentioned shame. I would have not described it that way, but when you say it that way, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. I'm like, how did this happen? I know better than this. This isn't how I run my life. This isn't how I run my calendar. This is crazy, right? Now, I could see light at the end of the tunnel. There was a few weeks there, and I knew I could do anything for a few weeks.
Sure.
But I had to go back to the habits, and I had to think like, well, what's the opposite? Because having a schedule like this is not okay with me, right? I'll be burnt out in no time. And I won't have the time for the things that are important to me, like my family and otherwise. I'm going to be a wreck. I won't be able to serve them at the level that I would like to.
Sure.
And so, like, to your point, it's like the opposite of not going back to some of the skills and habits around controlling my calendar, saying no to the wrong things.
Yeah.
And doing those things I had built real skill around and just gotten away from, drifted from, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Wasn't okay with me. The opposite wasn't okay. So I was like, all right, back to the fundamentals.
Okay, so let's talk about the mindset that you had to get to think differently about that. Because one of the things that I see agents really, really struggle with is they're unwilling to maybe get leverage, or they tell themselves a story that I have to do everything. Nobody can do it as good as I do. They're out of control, all of this stuff. Chase, you don't realize how busy I am, right? And in my back of my mind, it's really a harsh thing to say. I'm just like, yeah, my high school son thinks that way, and his life is so simple. Right? So it's mindset as perspective.
Totally.
But somehow you've gotten to this place where you can intentionally limit your output for the sake of next 30 years of output.
Right.
And a lot of people don't have. A lot of people are like, no, you don't understand. I have to burn out right now. There's no other option. How do you break out of that?
Well, I think you got to think long term, right? And you've got to think this idea of compounding, right? Like sometimes winning is just staying in the game when everyone else isn't, right? Like, and that doesn't sound sexy or fun or cool, or like with medals hanging around your neck on stage. It's like staying in the game sometimes is more than most are doing.
Yes.
Right? And so that's not always the case, but at times that's the case.
Yes.
I want to have a great career, right? Like I have this idea of where I want to go long term, and it's far. So I don't have any, it can help me not slip into this falsehood of like, I can get there tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because if it's far enough and it's big enough, you can't get there tomorrow. Right? But you can get there in 20 years or 30 years, right? Whatever that is.
Yeah.
We overestimate what we can do in a year. We underestimate what we can do in 5 as an example.
Yeah.
And so you got to be thinking long game. And that helps with this idea of like, just overscheduled, overstressed. I'm not a big fan of the hustle culture. Right?
Sure.
As it's been kind of dubbed. Not because I'm not a fan of hustling.
Right.
Or working hard.
Right.
But it's like, okay, I don't want to burn out because I'm gonna miss out on all of the compounding if I can't even, I can't do that for more than 5 years because, I'm over it. I'm burnt out. I lost my family. I lost my passion.
Yeah.
All the terrible things that can happen. I'm going to miss out on what I was after in the first place.
Sure.
Right. So it's like, don't trade the happy culture for the hustle culture. Right. Is that what Gary said the other day?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, I wrote that down. I'm like, I'll have to think about that more. But I kind of get that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I want to enjoy all of it all the way up and some of the compounding, right? So
yeah,
it's not a matter of if you're going to do something necessarily, if it's your goal, it's just when you're going to do it.
Yeah. Another one of the patterns that we see through all these mastery conversations is that the long game is fundamentally a personal development game, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I heard from you was when people are constantly playing the short game and they're just like hustle, 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 they're doing activities and they're not doing personal growth, because people who have gone beyond that, they're saying, hey, control your calendar, do all of these things, read these books, develop yourself, go to these courses. And what they're really saying is who you are today, even if you got everything that you thought you deserved 10 years from now, tomorrow, you would destroy it because you have not become the person who can actually have it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think Maxwell says it this way, your business will only grow to the extent that you do, right? And I prefer the way Jim Rohn said it, which was, if you work hard at your job, you'll earn a living. But if you work hard on yourself, you'll earn a fortune. And by the way, that takes time.
Yeah.
We're the hardest people to work on. Matter of fact, we prefer to work on other people rather than ourselves because it seems easier.
Let me give you the 5 things that I'm not doing personally, but you need.
If I can just fix you, Reed, I won't have to focus on fixing me, right?
Yes.
And so, I think about that. It's like, okay, so how do you work hard on yourself? Well, you said some of the things. And that takes time and effort and compounding.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I think just having that long-term view is part of it. And then again, being around other people that can demonstrate that for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you buy into the hustle culture and you spend time with people who all they do is work like crazy and do things like crazy rather than developing themselves, then you're probably likely to do that too. If you seek out those that are successful and pursuing success in a very different way and maybe have kind of gone before you and can kind of show you a different way of thinking about what that looks like, I would argue that not only will you have more success long-term, a lot more, because you've spent time developing yourself, you didn't burn out, you got skills that were outside of just whatever it is you were doing that day. You got leadership skills and personal habit skills and personal growth, right? You'll have more success long-term and you'll enjoy it along the way a lot more.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you create some of that space, like there's a lot of beautiful things in life in addition to just working.
Yeah.
Right. And you can do those things too and work hard and be successful.
Yeah. It's, your calendar and your bank account betray you ultimately, because if there's somebody out there who is living a bigger life that you would deem a bigger life and they have more money than you, they have done something different than you.
Yeah.
That's like it. They didn't win the lottery, all that stuff. That happens like 1 out of 1,000 times.
Yeah.
So if that's true and you don't feel the need to protect your ego from that reality, now it's incredibly empowering because you just got to do something different.
Yeah.
You just got to grow.
That's right. And I love the idea of, someone's calendar or bank account because ultimately that's the result.
Yeah.
Right. And the results typically don't lie. Right. And so I think that, understanding like, first of all, what is the result that I'm actually after? And then how have people achieved that result in such a way that matches the lifestyle that I want to live, who I want to be, et cetera.
Yeah, gosh, I love that. So Chase, the goal of this podcast is to impact, empower, and encourage people in our industry, the real estate industry.
Yeah.
And I just think you have totally done that. Like you being able to share these things, definitely, I'm just in my head, I'm like, I'm glad I have this recorded because I don't have a notebook in my hand and there's definitely some things, right? So I really appreciate you serving agents. That's all you do. That's what you do in our industry. So I appreciate that. Appreciate you. And thanks for being a guest.
Thanks for the opportunity, man.
Absolutely, brother.